Hello and welcome to Apologetics 101. I'm your host, Brian, your resident Christian apologist. And today we got a treat for you. For the very first time ever, Dr. John Baumgardner is going to be appearing on my channel. And you're going to see him in an interview with me on catastrophic plate tectonics. That's what we're going to be talking about today. In this presentation, though, he will be getting into quite a bit of evidence for the global flood. I think you guys will enjoy that as well. I'm sorry about not being able to produce some video for the last couple months, but I've been really tied up on the so-called heat problem that I've been formulating a model on, as well as writing a paper. I'm writing two papers, one on accelerated nuclear decay, and the other is on my model. Resolving the so-called heat problem, and so I'm going to be writing papers on both of them. I'm about ready. I've been working on my first paper on a particular theory that I have come up with on accelerated nuclear decay. It's awesome. I think you guys would like it if they manage to actually publish it. I'm submitting it to Answers Research Journal and see what they think on it, and so hopefully it gets passed. Hopefully it will be peer reviewed. But in any given case, more on that at some other point. I do plan on doing some videos on the so-called heat problem later on down the road. But right now, today we're going to be having Dr. John Baumgardner on, but I am doing a small tribute. And of course, I always appreciate my followers on this channel. You guys have tons of patience. I don't do this full time. There's loads of work involved in making videos, and for the most part, you guys have stayed with me. There's a few people that tend to unsubscribe whenever I don't produce a video in a little bit. But the rest of you, you have amazing patience. You are wonderful. I love you all, and I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're all here, whether you're subscribed or not. If you're viewing my video, I'm glad you're here. If you're a critic, I'm glad you're here, because I want every one of y'all to view what we have in store. Even if you don't agree with us at the end of the day, maybe you can at least better understand where we're coming from and the arguments we're presenting and that sort of thing. And of course, today I got Dr. John Baumgardner, so this will be the first time I ever did a video on catastrophic plate tectonics, and the first time I've had Dr. Baumgardner on. And he, like Dr. Andrew Snelling, was a member of the RAPE project as well. So it's awesome to have him on here, and he's from Liberty University, my home college, so I really like that. But what I was getting at here is that I created a tribute. This tribute is because I don't have I didn't do a special video. I was going to, but I didn't do a special video for the start of the year, and I kind of missed the boat on that anyhow, since we're 2 months into the year. And I decided to do, maybe it'd be a good idea to do a tribute. So that's what I did. I did a tribute. And so we're going to get into that in a second. You're going to see a tribute, then I'm going to air my intro, and then we'll go shoot right into the interview. But this tribute isn't just for my followers, isn't just because of my channel. Above all, I am so thankful to Jesus Christ, my Lord, who he is my biggest motivator to why I do what I do, because I don't get paid for this. This is not my job. My job overnight, I work overnight, and I sleep during the day. I've got a family to support, but this is not where I made my money. Okay. So what motivates me? What motivates me to make videos, to do this much work in producing this kind of content for you guys? Well, one, I love all y'all, of course, and I want to be able to edify the church and be a blessing to others and make a difference in this world. But above all, it's because my Lord Jesus Christ died for me on the cross for my sins, And I am so thankful for that, that he forgave me. He gave me a purpose. And I feel like that above all, that is who I think. And of course, I thank every one of y'all, and I love every one of y'all, but above all, Jesus, of course. And I hope you guys feel the same way, or at least a lot of you do. Some of the critics probably won't, but I'm sure a lot of you will feel the same way that I do. But I hope you enjoy this video. I know different people have different models on their take on catastrophic plate tectonics. So if you're a biblical creationist, you have another model. That's fine. You can have other models, but just keep in mind to consider the evidence at least. Consider the arguments that have been made for a particular model, and that's what you need to do whenever you accept a particular model. When I went to research the so-called heat problem, I never know I was going to formulate my own model. My original thought was that I was gonna, research it, find the model that I liked, and go with that. But this model that I formulated really works, and so I like it. But I know that me and Dr. Baumgardner is going to get into that. He does think the the heat issue was taken away or dealt with miraculously in some way, but we'll get into that when we get into it. But in any case, I have no problem with someone invoking miracles, but and if there's good reasons to support a miracle, I wouldn't have a problem with invoking one. But in this case, I'm not so sure you don't have to invoke it, but obviously Dr. Baumgardner feels like he has to, so he does. And so, but we'll get into that later on down the road. But any given case, so I'm gonna play a tribute that I made, and then we're gonna jump into the interview that I had with Dr. John Baumgardner. Thank you.
Oh, come, all ye faithful, joyful and triumphant. Oh, come ye to Bethlehem. Come and behold him, born the King of angels. Oh, come, let us adore him. Oh, come, let us adore him. Oh, come, let us adore him, Christ the Lord. God of God, light of light, lo, he abhors not the virgin's womb. Very God begotten, not created. Oh, come, let us adore him. Oh, come, let us adore him. Oh, come, let us adore him, Christ the Lord.
Hello, and welcome to Apologetics 101. I'm your host, Brian, and I'm here today with Dr. John Baumgardner from Liberty University. And I've got an introduction here that I'm going to read out. And Dr. Baumgardner, if there's any updates, any additional things going on currently with you and stuff, go ahead and clarify that after I get done reading it. All right. John Baumgartner was working on his PhD in electrical engineering when he discovered the reality of Jesus in a dramatic way through a group Bible study of the Gospel of John about a 4-year tour of duty at the Air Force Weapons Laboratory, where he was engaged in gas dynamic laser research. He joined the staff at Campus Crusade for Christ, observing the deliberate use of evolution to assault and destroy the faith of Christian college students Dr. Baumgardner began to develop and present classroom lectures and evening forums to expose evolution's false claims. Upon realizing that Noah's flood involved a planetary scale tectonic catastrophe, he left Campus Crusade to begin a PhD program in geophysics at UCLA in order to obtain the expertise and credentials to address the problem of the mechanism of the Genesis flood at a professional and professional scientific level. His PhD thesis research involved the development of a 3D spherical shell finite elemental model for the Earth's mantle in program now known as Terra. Upon completing his PhD in geophysics and space physics, uh, uh, he accepted a position as a staff scientist in the theoretical division Alamos National Laboratory, where he has continued his research in planetary mantle dynamics, including the potential for catastrophic mantle overturn. He has presented papers describing this mechanism for the Genesis flood, known as the Catastrophic Plate Tectonics, at three international conferences on creationism held in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. That's the topic of today's video. Dr. Baumgardner's current technical work at Los Alamos included development of a new global ocean model for investigating climate change. He also currently a member of the Radioisotopes and Age of the Earth, the book's right here, Age of the Earth Committee, and an adjunct faculty member of the Institute for Creation Research. The only one I wasn't sure if it was still up to date was that last part. Are you still, I know you're working for Liberty, but do you work for Institute for Creation Research still?
Yes, uh, I, I left the Institute for Creation Research in 2008, so that's been a while. And I'm currently an emeritus faculty member at Liberty University. Uh, I'm continuing to do creation research, but I'm located now in Virginia at Liberty University.
Awesome. And Liberty University is my home college. Actually, my degree right there is from Liberty University. So
Yeah, I
that's
noticed
awesome.
that. I
You
noticed
noticed
that.
it? Yeah, that's an associate's degree. I'm actually getting my bachelor's degree soon. I owe a little less than $300 for my last couple of classes. I'm paying that off for my income tax return, and then I'm going back to college. I'm still in excellent standing with Liberty. I love Liberty. It is a great university. I would recommend it to anyone. Is this still the largest Christian university in the world, I believe?
Well, as far as I know, counting all the online students, yes, I
Yeah.
think it is, as far as I know.
And it's got one of the best online programs I've ever seen. I've sat there and shopped around for other online programs, and its online program is like really well developed. You can get most of your degrees 100% online. That's why I do. I'm an online student. 100% of your degrees online from Liberty University. So that is awesome. So they put a lot of thought into their distant learning programs. Um, do you like working at Liberty? I mean, is it pretty good university?
Yeah, it's a great blessing to be here, to be able to interact with students and other faculty. I really love it here.
That's awesome. I hope to teach at Liberty one day. But great school. But what is Terra? It says that you were part of the Terror thing. It's an acronym on your introduction.
The Terra, yeah, Terra is the name that has been given to this computer program that I wrote, like, what is it, 45 years ago already, to model the Genesis flood, to model flow inside the earth, how rock flows inside the earth, and enabled me to get more insight on exactly what happened during the Genesis flood, that it was a tectonic catastrophe, as I'll get into later.
Oh, awesome. I'm curious though, as a follow-up question, is that connected to your computational modeling of the catastrophic plate tectonics? Because I know you have a
It is.
paper on that.
Yes, it is. It is. And I'll show a couple of animations from Terra in my presentation.
Awesome. That's awesome. And of course, like we said, you work with Liberty University. You used to work for Institute for Creation Research. I've had Dr. Jeffrey Tompkins on here before from Institute for Creation Research. Um, and so I've had a lot of good speakers. All right. So, with the introductions out of the way, unless you have anything to add, Dr. Baumgardner, we can jump right in whenever you're ready.
The title I've given here is Noah's Flood. What was it really like? And let's see here. So, for many Christians today, their mental concept of the flood has not advanced that much since they were 4 years old and learned the words in Sunday school that the rains came down and the floods came up. Uh, I'm sure there's a range of understanding about the flood in this audience, but uh, regardless, if we really want to get an accurate picture, it's helpful to take a glimpse at the biblical text. So let's take a few moments to do that. If we jump to Genesis 6 and read a few verses, verse 5, then the Lord saw that the wickedness of mankind was great on the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of their hearts was only evil continually. That's a pretty serious indictment on what the world was like at that point. Verse 6, so the Lord was sorry that he had made mankind on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart. Then the Lord said, I will wipe out mankind whom I've created from the face of the land, mankind and animals as well, and crawling things, and the birds of the sky, for I'm sorry that I've made them. And then in the next chapter, we read, but Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. King James says grace. That's the very first occurrence of that word grace in the Bible. Verse 11, now the earth was corrupt in the sight of God, and the earth was filled with violence. And God looked on the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for mankind had corrupted his way upon the earth. Then God said to Noah, the end of all flesh has come before me. For the earth is filled with violence because of them. And behold, I'm about to destroy them, that's the human race, with the earth. And in verse 11 in chapter 7, in the 600th year of Noah's life, well, I might just mention that the remainder of chapter 6, God gives Noah instructions for building an ark to save his family and two of every kind of animal and bird, and in some cases seven pairs. And then in chapter 7, we have a summary of what happened in the flood. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, on the 17th day of the month, on the same day, all the fountains of the great deep burst open, and the floodgates of the sky were opened. The rain fell upon the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. And jump to verse 19, and the water prevailed more and more upon the earth, so that all the high mountains everywhere under the heavens were covered. And all flesh that moved on the earth perished, birds and cattle and beasts, and every swarming thing that swarms on the earth, and all mankind. Universal terms used here, all the high mountains, all flesh, all mankind. Verse 23, thus he blotted out every living thing that was on the face of the land, from man to animals to creeping things and to birds of the sky, and they were blotted out from the earth, and only Noah was left together with those that were with him in the ark. And verse 24, and the water prevailed on the earth 150 days. So what kind of a physical event would this have been? Well, at a minimum, it would have been the end of the world for billions of human beings. Yes, I believe had been time for the human population to reach that size, certainly hundreds of millions, if not a billion or two people. So we see uh, a horrendous cataclysm, a total destruction of all land-dwelling, air-breathing life over the entire earth, as the Genesis text describes, surely must have left behind an abundance of physical evidence. Wouldn't you think? Actually, that evidence is beyond what the human mind can possibly imagine. There's an abundance of evidence for this cataclysm. But just what sort of evidence might we expect? Well, for starters, how about billions of dead things buried in rock layers laid down by water all over the earth? Perhaps some of you have heard Ken Ham speak of the flood, and he uses that phrase as to what you would expect if this kind of cataclysm had really happened. And indeed, as we go to the rock layers, that's precisely what we find. Just huge numbers of fossils, in many cases exquisitely preserved, as we see here. And so what about the rock layers themselves? What sort of physicalism has actually occurred? Well, that answer might not be so obvious, but the evidence for global cataclysm is just as clear and abundant as the testimony from the fossils. The Grand Canyon, for example, provides a representative glimpse of the sediment layers that blanket most of the continental regions of the Earth. These layers document a global cataclysm in an overwhelming and undeniable way. We see this layer cake pattern of layers that stretch as far as the eye can see where it's possible, like in the Grand Canyon. These layers extend well beyond the extent of the Grand Canyon, hundreds of miles in both directions. In some cases, some of these layers are continent-wide and even worldwide, even global, the same layers, the same sequence, the fine scale sequence is the same. The coloration mineralogy is the same on these layers. So it documents something on a very large scale was operating to produce this sequence of layers. All right, some aspects of these layers. First of all, the layers consist of sediment particles of sand, silt, and clay, and carbonate that have been suspended, transported by moving water. So just looking in detail at the layers themselves, we see evidence of water having played a major role in carrying, and first probably eroding these particles and then transporting them and depositing them in these laterally extensive layers. This is a cross section that runs northward through northern Arizona and into Utah. You see it slices through the Grand Canyon, slices through Zion Canyon to the north, and further north, Bryce Canyon. And so I'm going to use this slide several times just as a reminder of what that sediment sequence looks like. Now, these rock layers commonly continue horizontally, as I've already said, for hundreds to thousands of miles in both directions. And this implies that the water processes responsible were enormous in physical scale. So it's already starting to boggle the mind to imagine processes of this scale that could deposit layers, in some cases thin layers, that extended over such vast distances. Now, above a global scale discontinuity known as the Great Unconformity, and that's marked by the tip of this black arrow. The sediment above that point in the record, the sediment layers tend to contain fossils. The abrupt appearance of fossils at that physical boundary in the rock record is known as the Cambrian explosion. In that rock just above that boundary, we find just an incredible diversity of fossils of different types of animals. And that explosive appearance of fossils in the rock record, with no fossils below that boundary of multicellular animals, and then an abundance of fossils above it, is a certain indicator as that this marks the beginning of the flood. And it's a big problem for secular people, big problem for evolutionists. That their concept, the Darwinian concept, is that life started out simple and gradually became more and more complex. But as we look in these lowest rock layers, we find almost every animal phylum or major category represented in these rocks. So there's complex animals, very complex animals, right from the beginning in the rock record. So that contradicts this simple to complex picture that Darwinism has painted. Okay. Furthermore, this vertical sequence of layers commonly displays flat boundaries between the layers, with little or no erosional channeling across the layer boundaries. Now, this is much different from the Earth's surface today. The Earth's surface today is heavily channelized. A dramatic example of a big channel is the Grand Canyon, but Bryce Canyon, Zion Canyon represent strong channeling in the Earth's surface. And so, but in contrast to what we see on the Earth's surface today, these boundaries between the layers in this record have almost no channeling, no erosional channels in there. Speaking of a much different regime of sediment transport and deposition. And it indicates, as I'll mention later, that the flood laid down these layers very rapidly, one after another, with essentially no time but from one layer to the next. And these flat boundaries is illustrated vividly by the boundary between the Coconino Sandstone and the Hermit Shale, readily observable in the Grand Canyon. This is a photo I took along the Bright Angel Trail just below the Visitor Center on the south rim of the Grand Canyon. And you can note the knife-edge sharp boundary between the lighter rock above it and the darker rock below it. No evidence of any time or any soil profile or any evidence of any elapsed time between the deposition of the rock below and the rock above. Okay, the implications of these observational realities are profound. To deposit such uniform, horizontally extensive layers with flat boundaries between them requires that vast portions of the continental surface were flooded by rapidly moving water and were nearly smooth. There's no way you can produce these flat layers apart from rapidly moving water over vast distances on nearly smooth surfaces. Furthermore, the water speed had to be high to keep sediment particles in suspension over such great distances. The water has to be turbulent. It's the turbulence that keeps the particles in suspension. And this state of affairs has to be maintained over these vast distances to produce these observations imply a regime of erosion, transport, and deposition in the past, radically different from what we see going on the Earth's surface today. Today, higher portions of the continents are deeply sculpted by erosional channels. Sedimentation today generally is severely restricted in lateral extent. The deposition is right near a stream or in the delta that it forms. And even more than that, in most settings, layering is entirely destroyed by burrowing organisms. So on the Earth today, where you do have deposition and there has been layering, that layering within a day is typically destroyed by so many burrowing worms and organisms. Now, these three canyons I'm pointing out here, Bryce Canyon, Zion Canyon, and Grand Canyon, illustrate the dramatic erosional channeling that slices into the modern continental surface. And again, as I said earlier, such features are almost entirely absent in the deeper record. Moreover, there's abundant physical evidence within the layers themselves that water velocities responsible for their deposition were extreme. And in several cases, water velocities were sufficient to produce underwater sand dunes 50 to 100 feet in height. One example is the Navajo sandstone, out of which Bryce Canyon is carved in Arizona and Utah. Cross beds, they're called. I'll give a little more detail in the next slide. And these cross beds are a certain indicator of high-speed water. This is a close-up picture of the giant cross beds in the Navajo sandstone. The finer structure here corresponds to layers deposited on the front sides of huge underwater sand dunes that were generated by high-speed water flow. So these cross beds are relatively common in the rock record, and they indicate very rapidly flowing water. And so because fossilization requires rapid and complete burial, fossils are a reliable indicator of catastrophic conditions, including the high-speed water. So again, in order to preserve a fossil, it has to be buried completely and quickly. Otherwise, scavengers destroy the organism, or bacteria. The organism will just decay and not last very long. So the existence of these fossils indicate they were very rapidly buried by rapidly moving water. So are the processes responsible for these striking features of the layered fossil-bearing record prevalent today? The answer is obviously no. And therefore, the central premise of Charles Lyell's book, Principles of Geology, and that premise was that the present is the key to the past, what is simply invalid. Evidences we have just examined reveal that the geology community has been wandering in the weeds for the past 190 years since Lyell first published his book. Essentially, almost all the geologists, trained hundreds, studied Charles Lyell's book, which insisted on slow and gradual processes were responsible for the sediment record and the rock record in general. But what we've just looked at repudiates that. Shows that that's just simply not the case. But geology, which was founded on this uniformitarian outlook, has been, as I say, wandering in the weeds since that time, oblivious to the fact that their picture of how the record was formed simply is contradicted by what one sees in the field. So the only place within the biblical account of world history that formation of such laterally extensive fossil-bearing sediment layers could possibly have occurred is, I'm sure you guessed it, during the Genesis flood. There's no other time in the history of the world, according to the account in the Bible, when such large-scale cataclysm could have occurred. And as to its intensity, the Genesis text reveals that all this activity unfolded within the time span of only a single year. So its intensity was, I believe, almost beyond what a human being can imagine. So given the biblical timescale and the striking physical evidence for a global flood cataclysm, some obvious issues come to mind. First, at a very basic level, how could so much physical, geological change occur in such a brief span of time? What kind of mechanisms could accomplish that? And second, I just indicated that more specifically, what was the primary causal mechanism? What mechanism or mechanisms were responsible? Major answers relating to these crucial questions have come from the ocean bottom over about the last 70 years. A huge discovery from the 1960s was that all of today's basaltic ocean crust has been formed recently in Earth history. It was found mainly in the 1960s that all of it is younger than most of the continental fossil-bearing sediment record. Again, this was just a mind-boggling discovery. Nobody suspected it before that the igneous floor of the ocean was all formed, that rock cooled and crystallized after much of the sediment record was already deposited on the continents. So that really surprised the geology community, that discovery. So let me just be more specific on the timing of all this. All that igneous ocean crust has formed since the point marked by the base of the blue arrow in this figure. That blue arrow is just above the Kaibab limestone that represents the surface at the south rim of the Grand Canyon. So all the rock, all the sediments that were deposited are above that point in the record have formed. Well, I'll put it the other way. All the ocean floor has formed since that point in the record, which has some significant implications. What it implies that the opening of the entire Atlantic Ocean, as well as the Pacific Ocean, occurred during the flood, and that the continents migrated by thousands of miles in only a few months' time during the flood. Again, some of this is probably new to many of you, but that discovery in the 60s, it basically, if we take the fossils as having been formed during the flood, it means that all this continental motion happened during the flood, and all this ocean floor was formed. All that basalt was erupted, cooled, and crystallized during the flood that today makes up the igneous ocean floor of the Earth. So has given us some important clues as to what the mechanisms were. Okay. So what about the pre-flood ocean floor? Is there any of that still left? The answer is no. It's entirely missing from the Earth's surface today. And taking cues from today's ocean floor, logically, it must have been recycled into the Earth's interior during the flood. So again, you're getting the picture. I'm trying to sort of gradually lay out this picture that the flood was, to a large degree, a tectonic catastrophe. It involved the tectonic plates moving by thousands of miles during the flood. So these observations imply that the Genesis flood, in addition to being a hydrological cataclysm, was also a global tectonic cataclysm. The understanding that rapid, large-scale tectonic change was a fundamental aspect of the Genesis flood has come to be referred to as catastrophic plate tectonics. So that was, I'll just say I was a believer at that point. I was converted. I had a dramatic conversion experience when I was 26, when I was in graduate school. It wasn't until some 5 years later that I really started to become aware of all this evidence for the flood. And then it was 3 years later that I realized that I became aware of all this evidence for tectonic change, large-scale tectonic change associated with the flood. And so, so that was a big epiphany for me. It resulted in my leaving Campus Crusade for Christ, where I was at the time, beginning a graduate school, beginning a graduate program at UCLA, and to seek to get the credentials and the education, the training I needed to work on these issues at a professional level. And then some amazing doors opened to me. God allowed me to finish my PhD with flying colors. I developed this program now known as Terra as my part of my doctoral dissertation there. And I started applying it to understanding the flood. And I gave my first presentation that included this concept of catastrophic plate tectonics in 1986 at the First International Conference on Creationism in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Now, such large-scale tectonic change at the Earth's surface almost automatically requires that the Earth's interior also had to be involved in a profound way. So let's review some of the basic aspects of the Earth's interior. This is a slice, a cross-section through the Earth. It shows the two main regions inside the Earth. The outer part, which is mostly silicate rock, about the outer 2,000 miles, is known as the mantle. And then inside the mantle is the core, which is mostly molten iron. There's a small solid inner core at the very center of the Earth, but the vast majority of the core is liquid, has a viscosity about that of water. Very hot liquid iron. The uppermost part of the mantle is the thin, cold, mechanically strong lithosphere, it's called. It's that white layer at the very top. And it's cold and strong and brittle, broken into about a dozen large plates. And these plates slide over a much weaker layer just beneath it, known as the asthenosphere. And that asthenosphere layer is about 1,000 times weaker than the lithosphere, and that the weakness of the asthenosphere allows these plates to slide over the rest of the Earth, rest of the mantle, with almost no resistance. And so that's a quick picture. And so okay, so where two plates are pulling apart, as you see at the top of this figure, where the mid-Atlantic ridge is marked, that's where the two plates on either side of the ridge are pulling apart, and the Americas are moving away from Europe and Africa. And then at about uh, about 10 o'clock or so, uh, you see the Pacific plate that's plunging back into the earth. Other parts of the earth, these plates are plunging back into the mantle through a process known as subduction. I'll mention in a moment. So anyway, this is an attempt to give you just a quick little tutorial on what the inside of the earth is like. And well, this slide gives a little more detail back into the earth. And in all cases, the the plate plunging into the earth is a plate that is called an oceanic plate. It's from the floor of the ocean, and where this occurs, the boundary between that plate and the adjacent plate is a trench, a deep trench that can be like 20,000 feet deep. It's a result of the weight of that plate that's subducting into the earth, pulling the ocean floor down. Now, normally that subducting plate and the overriding plate are locked together. So it's the subducting plate that is continuously moving, and the overriding plate is welded to it and is deforming as that other plate is moving downward into the earth. So that creates an increasing amount of stress at that boundary where they're welded together. And when the stress gets high enough, that boundary, that fault it can no longer sustain the stress. It becomes unlocked, and a big slip of it occurs, which produces an earthquake, a big earthquake. So most of the world's earthquakes occur in these regions where there's a subducting plate that's plunging into the earth and is most of the time locked to the overriding plate. And another thing that happens in this region is that water in the surface of the subducting plate, when it gets down about 100 miles below the surface, that water is forced out of the plate and rises up into the rock above it, and that rock is so hot because the water reduces its melting temperature, that overlying rock melts and it produces magma and volcanoes. And because we have subduction around most of the Pacific Ocean today, we have volcanoes around much of that Pacific margin. It's called the Pacific Ring of Fire. So what is causing that is the water that's trapped in the sediment. Well, it's trapped in the surface of this subducting plate. Is released, rises, and lowers the melting temperature of the rock above it and causes it to melt. So that's a little more detail about what happens in a subduction zone. In regions where the plates are pulling apart, it's said that seafloor spreading is occurring there. And what happens is that new ocean crust forms in the gap where these plates are pulling apart. This little inset here shows as those plates pull apart, molten rock from below rises up and fills the gap and cools and crystallizes. And there tends to be water that goes down and circulates in this region of rock. The cooling rock shrinks and cracks form and provides pathways for the water to penetrate the rock. So the rock is cooled by circulating water, and that molten rock then cools and crystallizes into solid basalt. There's typically a layer about 4 to 5 miles thick of basaltic rock on the ocean bottom. Okay. So catastrophic plate tectonics is similar to conventional plate tectonics that's occurring today, except that the plate velocities are about 2 billion times higher. So during the flood, the plates were moving at about on the order of 5 miles per hour, 2 to 5 miles per hour, instead of about 2 inches per year as they are today. So that's one big difference, how fast the plates were moving during the flood. So how is that possible that the plates could move so much faster? Laboratory experiments show that mantle rock weakens dramatically under stress at stress levels that can't exist inside the Earth. And this weakening is what provides the potential for what's known as a runaway catastrophe. But before we talk about that, let's consider how much continental motion occurred during the flood. The following sequence of images summarizes how the continents have moved just since the time when the supercontinent Pangaea existed, as reconstructed by the secular earth science community. These images were produced by Professor Ron Blakey at Northern Arizona University. So here I'm going to go through a sequence of images from early Triassic. That's when the first dinosaurs started to appear. So this is early Jurassic. You see Pangaea starting to break apart. Mid-Jurassic, late Jurassic, early Cretaceous, mid-Cretaceous, late Cretaceous, end of the Cretaceous, period known as the Oligocene, Ice Age to the present. So all that plate motion had to have occurred during the flood. So we'll go backward again. And so for all the fossils to have been laid down on the continents during that period of time means that all of this seafloor spreading had to have occurred also during that short period of time. Okay, just an astonishing amount of geologic change implied. That sequence is within the span of time of fossil-bearing sediments on the continents, because fossils are indicative of the portion of the geological record associated with the flood. All the plate motion shown in the preceding sequence must logically have accompanied the flood and have unfolded in the span of a few months' time. Catastrophic plate tectonics, as we're describing, like conventional plate tectonics, accounts for many of the prominent features on Earth today: the mid-ocean ridges, the deep ocean trenches, volcanism adjacent to the trenches, and the global distribution of earthquakes we see. However, there are some processes that are distinctive to catastrophic plate tectonics, and these include supersonic steam jets emerging from the seafloor along 40,000 miles of rapidly spreading mid-ocean rift zones. So where these plates are pulling apart rapidly at about 5 miles per hour, you have much more melted rock in direct contact with ocean water at the sea bottom. And that generates these supersonic steam jets all along that 40,000 mile length of spreading ridge on the Earth. So this was a huge aspect of it. These steam jets ripped up through the ocean and carried up a large amount of liquid water in the fringes of these jets, water that then fell back to Earth as heavy rain. So that provides a natural explanation for the 40 days and nights of heavy rain during the first part of this cataclysm. Now, a crucial physics issue that I alluded to earlier is the following: how can ocean plates sink vertically through 1,800 miles or 2,900 kilometers of mantle rock in just a few weeks' time. So again, we've got we have this cross section through the Earth. There's about 2,000 miles of solid silicate rock above the core, maybe a little more accurately, about 1,800 miles worth. So how can plates at the surface slide in the mantle and sink and get to the bottom in a short period of time? Well, they can sink because they're cooler and denser than the mantle rock into which they're sinking. But the rapid plate motion can occur because this mantle rock weakens under stress, as I mentioned earlier, so that this sinking lithosphere can sink at on the order of a meter per second or so, a few miles per hour instead of just centimeters per year. Now, what does that rock look like? This is a sample of the rock that exists in the upper mantle. It consists of green olivine crystals and black pyroxene crystals. So the good fraction of the Earth, something like more than 80% of the inside of the Earth, is made up of this type of rock. Now, that kind of rock has been studied for, well, roughly the 1960s. That's when there started to be a lot of incentive in trying to understand how rock in the mantle could possibly deform. And so there were apparatuses like this one. This one was in a laboratory in Paris. The cylinder is an oven for carefully controlling the temperature, and the sample is right at the center of this cylinder. And silica rods at the top and bottom apply force to the sample, and that force causes that sample to deform. And so that's what is going on. And after that deformation occurs, the sample is removed. It can be studied under an electron microscope. And these are images of the surface of that deformed crystal. And you can see those lines. What has happened is when that crystal is subjected to shear stress, that material deforms. The deformation occurs as planes of atoms, like cards in a deck of cards, slide past one another. So this process of deformation at high temperature and pressure, high levels of stress, has been studied. In some cases, like in the lower picture, you have a deformation going on in both directions. But in any case, it's been carefully studied, and the deformation properties of these rocks, of the minerals that comprise the rocks, has been carefully studied. And already by the early 1980s, enough data existed, experimental data existed, to draw deformation maps like this one. I know it's not easy to interpret, but what this map shows is that there are different regimes of deformation depending on the rate of stress and the temperature. And in the upper right, basically where those red lines cross, that is the regime that can actually be accessed in the laboratory. The deformation rates are high enough for the rock to deform in a few minutes to a few hours time in the laboratory, so they can be measured accurately. You can see there the words laboratory strain rates. That means that's the regime which can actually be measured in the laboratory. And it turns out that's the regime that's most relevant to this what happened in the Earth during the flood. So we can actually measure the rocks and determine the properties of those rocks right in the regime we're interested in for modeling the flood. So this is from a 1983 paper already. So anyway, so the other regimes are a diffusion regime down in the lower left, which involves the migration of individual defects, like a missing atom or an extra atom in the lattice. And the upper part of this diagram is what's called the low temperature plasticity regime, which also can be measured accurately. And it also comes into play, but I'm not going to go into more detail. The point is here that we can measure how these rocks behave under extreme conditions in the lab. Again, we're talking, and that particular graph was for the green crystals, the olivine crystals shown here. So one thing I did, this was already about 25 years ago, was did a 2D calculation using these experimentally determined rock deformation properties. Took those properties, put them into a computer code, and they showed that the rock could run away. Actually, this is a little more recent calculation done about 5 years ago. And I started with some cold rock at the bottom of the upper mantle, shown in blue at the top, some hotter material at the bottom of the mantle, shown in red below. And it turns out that that's right. I have it started right on the verge of when runaway occurs. And this snapshot is right at the beginning when this material starts to catastrophically run away. And at this snapshot, the velocity's already reached a meter per second, which is close to 1 billion times faster than it deforms today. And so these are snapshots in this little calculation, and this is an animation of that calculation. What it does is show, using the deformation properties measured experimentally, when you put that into a computer code, it shows that this rock can deform, weakens dramatically, and it can, the cold material at the top can rapidly plunge down through the mantle. Material at the bottom can catastrophically rise to the surface. So this, even though the simulation is only 2D, it demonstrates that the physics indeed works, specifically that stress weakening in rocks can produce catastrophic consequences in a planet with the gravity field of the Earth. So now I want to show just briefly a 3D calculation using the Terra code that I developed way back in the early 1980s, that to illustrate what happens in 3 dimensions. Now this code, this is a cutaway view of the grid that it uses. And so the mantle, what represents the mantle, is chopped up into little cells, as you see here. In order to be able to visualize it, I'm just showing a coarse version of the grid with 32 layers and 1.3 million cells. More recently, I'm using a higher resolution grid that has 8 times as many cells. So what this code does is solve the equations of conservation of mass, conservation of energy, and a balance of forces on each cell on each time step. And I just step the calculation through time and see how the material deforms. And I know this, very few of you probably have had college level differential equations, but this is what those equations look like. The delta operator here corresponds to spatial derivatives, how things are changing spatially. Anyway, these are the equations that are used in professional engineering and in geophysics. And so those equations are solved on a supercomputer on that grid, and I need some initial conditions. So I take as an initial condition for the plate distribution at the surface, what is estimated to have been the plate distribution at about midway in the flood when Pangea existed. And this is my representation of Pangea. The dark black lot you can see represent the outlines of Africa, India, Australia, Antarctica, South America, North America, and Eurasia. And I initialized the calculation with plates in that configuration to get any motion in this calculation. To get motion started, I put some cold dense material where these blue lines exist, corresponding to some subduction along the boundaries of Pangea, plus a zone that extends from Southeast Asia down into where Australia is today. I need something to get the calculation going. This is a slice through the spherical shell and shows the blue here is the cold material, extends down 400 kilometers or about 250 miles down into the earth, and it's 400 degrees colder than the surrounding material. So that little nudge at the very beginning gets the motion going. And so I can then run the calculation, step it through time, and I get this solution, this kind of solution where the continents pull apart and you have hot material rise to fill the gaps. And so that I'll play that once again. It's really astonishing. The plates tend to move in the direction that the seafloor data indicates they have moved since that point in Earth history. This is a slice through the center of the Earth, showing that the cold material does indeed sink it through the mantle and settle and spread out along the boundary between the core and the mantle, and hot material rises up to fill the gaps at the surface. And that particular animation spans about 125 days. That would be, yeah. So, and this is a view of that solution from the north, viewed from the North Pole. And here's a view from the South Pole. And the speeds are in the order of a little over a meter per second. So what that calculation shows is that this kind of situation is consistent with solving just the basic flow laws in a planet the size of the Earth. So is there any evidence supporting a recent episode of catastrophic plate tectonics? Yes, seismic images from the mantle reveal a ring of unexpectedly cold rock at the bottom of the mantle beneath the subduction zones that surround the Pacific Ocean. Now these are images based on what's called seismic tomography, which is similar to medical tomography. Medical tomography uses X-rays. Seismic tomography uses seismic waves from earthquakes. And so if you combine those earthquakes, maybe 10,000 or 20,000 earthquakes, you can come up with a 3D image of the sound speed of the rock inside the Earth. So what's actually measured is the sound speed. And here, blue corresponds to high sound speed, red low sound speed. Now, the thing that primarily influences the speed of sound is the temperature. So this basically, the blue corresponds to low temperature and the red to high temperature. But so this kind of technology first came on the scene in the mid-1980s, matured by the early 1990s. And so this is an image from some of those early 1990s calculations, but it was shocking what it showed. If you just used the standard translation of temperature of sound speed to temperature, it indicated that the temperature difference between the blue features and the red features was about 3,000 degrees centigrade. Now, that is the difference, estimated difference in temperature between rock and the core mantle boundary. So this is and I might mention here these two images, one's from the Eastern Hemisphere and one's from the Western Hemisphere. These red features appear to be hot rock being squeezed up from the sinking of the blue cold rock around it, squeezed up like toothpaste, one feature beneath Africa today and another feature beneath the Western or the Southern Central Pacific. And so these features have been an enigma already for 35 years, which the geophysics community has not been able to explain, at least within their framework of an old Earth. They can't even entertain the possibility that this represents a cataclysm that happened just a few thousand years ago, and that the blue rock is still cold enough to have that much of a temperature difference. So because they can't go there philosophically, this remains a mystery to them, an enigma they haven't been able to explain. Again, the sound difference in sound speed implies a temperature of the blue ring that's nearly the same as lithospheric rock today near the Earth's surface. It implies that rock has gotten down there in the very recent past and has not had time to warm up. The small amount of heating in that blue region is powerful evidence for an episode of runaway subduction in the Earth's very recent past. So here's evidence that supports a recent episode of catastrophic plate tectonics. So what is the energy source driving all of this? Well, it's simply the gravitational potential energy associated with the initial temperature state. The cold rock at the top has a tendency, because it's denser, of wanting to sink to the bottom, and the hot rock at the bottom, because of its low density, has a tendency to rise to the top. And there's potential energy in the cold rock at the top, wanting to bring that rock to the bottom, and potential energy in the rock at the bottom, which wants to move it to the top. So this mechanism requires no additional source of energy for it to unfold. But there's some further questions, pretty obvious, which I've not addressed yet. That first one is, how were the continents flooded? And then what caused the waters to drain away? And then by what means was the huge volume of fossil-bearing sediment generated, transported, and deposited? I'll try to quickly go address those questions. First, what caused the flooding of the continents? Well, just a brief answer is the rapid replacement of cold, higher density ocean plate with hotter, less dense ocean plate adjacent to the mid-ocean ridges caused the volume of the ocean basins to decrease, the sea level to rise, and water to spill onto the continents. So that, in words, is a simple way of describing it. So basically, you have this hot rock rising to the surface. That rock that's at the surface now has lower density. It causes the volume of the rock on the ocean bottom to be greater. It displaces water, and at the same time, the rock that had been at the bottom of the ocean, that is getting recycled into the Earth's interior, and that that rock had been pulling the ocean bottom down. It's not doing so as much now, and as a result, the ocean volume decreases as this process unfolds. So then, what caused the waters to recede? Well, many lines of evidence indicate that after the 150 days during which the waters prevailed on the earth, God caused the newly generated ocean plate to cool back toward its present state. This cooling of the ocean floor rock reduced the volume of that rock, causing the ocean bottom to subside and the global sea level to fall by something on the order of 5,000 feet. So when that happened, huge volumes of sediment were stripped away by erosion after all this sequence is deposited. So these black arrows show where sediment used to be on the continents, but has since been stripped away. So south of the Grand Canyon in Arizona, and even over the Grand Canyon, well, south of the Grand Canyon, this sediment adjacent to the bottom arrow was stripped away, and then all the remaining sediment above the Grand Canyon has been subsequently stripped away. So just a huge volume of sediment, enough to cover the continents by about 6,000 feet, in fact, has been moved from the continent interiors to the continental shelves. Just a staggering amount of sediment since these sediment layers were deposited, that is, during the flood, have since, at the end of the flood, been stripped away. And so what does that look like? Well, Bryce Canyon gives a little idea. These layers were some of the last to be deposited during the flood, and therefore they weren't that well lithified. They hadn't been transformed from sediment to rock very well, so they were readily eroded away. And you see the delicate structures that remain from that soft rock. But huge volumes, you can see here, were stripped away, looking into the picture toward the south. They were stripped away to the south. And then further to the south, we see evidence of intense scouring, the scouring that produced Archie's National Monument, and all that erosion represents rapid erosion, rapid scouring of this rock, and transport of that rock to the continental shelves. Okay, well, what about the sediment record itself? And I'm talking about these layers that we see on the continents that are exposed magnificently in the Grand Canyon. How was this sequence formed? Well, I've already indicated it's a result of rapidly moving water that suspended, transported, and deposited all that sediment. So this is a paramount issue that effective defense of the flood cries out for a reasonable explanation for how, in the span of only a few months' time, such a huge volume of fossil-bearing sediment came to blanket the continents in the orderly patterns we observe today. And now here's the map of the sediment's thickness today. The red and purple are the extreme, where the sediment thicknesses are extreme. These lie basically exclusively, or either, well, just on the continental margins, on continental shelves, and in some cases just off the continental shelf. So you can see just how effectively these thickest deposits of sediment are off the edges, like an apron, on the edges of the continents today. All right. So how did this happen? What was the mechanism that allowed this to happen? The short answer is that tens of thousands of mega tsunamis were involved. And these were produced by the locking the rapid locking and unlocking of the rapidly subducting lithospheric plates. A natural consequence of that rapid subduction are lots of tsunamis. Now, how powerful are tsunamis? Well, a big one occurred in 2011, just off the east coast of Japan, resulting from a 9.1 earthquake. There was about 160 feet of slip between the overriding plate, of which Japan is a part, and the under thrusting Pacific plate. And it triggered a devastating tsunami that reached heights up to 133 feet above sea level and traveled inland as far as 6 miles. And this is a photo as the tsunami is coming over the seawall. A seawall built to protect the coast from tsunamis, but not intended to deal with a tsunami from a 9.1 earthquake. So you see buses and cars being tossed around, boats eventually just tossed around like toys. Here is a snapshot of a little later as that tsunami advances inland, basically destroying everything in its path except for a few steel reinforced buildings. This is what the devastation looked like. Essentially total devastation. Something like close to 20,000 people just killed just in that narrow strip around the coast, and 130,000 buildings totally destroyed. So how are these produced in today's world? Well, it occurs when the overriding plate that is locked against the sinking subduction plate slips. When that fault unlocks, the overriding plate slips back to its unstressed state. Okay, so we're talking about a subducting plate that has been locked against the overriding plate. Here we see in A, that state where the plate on the right is locked against this sinking plate on the left. As time goes by, that little zone of orange increases. The deformation of the overriding plate increases the stress level, and the orange zone increases. In C, it reaches its limit. And in D, the fault unlocks and slips. It punches up the water that had been in that trench, and a tsunami is unleashed in E. So that quickly shows how that tsunamis are produced. Now, is there evidence for tsunamis during the flood? Yes, and they're in the form of what are known as geos, or table mounts. These are volcanic seamounts whose tops have been beveled flat by wave action. They're significant because they so clearly document the extreme tsunami activity during the flood. Here are two examples of geos. They are the Gifford Geo and one that's unnamed still, located about 400 miles east of Brisbane, Australia. The tops are about 3 kilometers. That's about, let's see, how much is that? It's about 2 miles above the sea bottom, and they rise to about a height of about 1,000 feet below sea level, and their surface area is considerable. These are pretty big features. And here's some more other places in the Pacific, and they're also, the tops are about 1,000 feet below sea level. Here you can see that there are lots of seamounts on the Pacific floor. There are about 50,000 of them on the Pacific floor alone, and some of them are these flat top geos. There are about 280 known geos in the world. A good fraction are in the North Pacific, but they're in all the oceans. even a couple in the Mediterranean Sea. Here's one in the Atlantic Ocean, just off the coast of Massachusetts, and its flat top is about 3,600 feet below sea level. Okay. Now, these geos affirm the reality of ferocious tsunamis during the flood. The fact that during the flood, the ocean base also affirms that during the flood, the ocean basins were much shallower than they are today, and thus that implied the continents were flooded. So we have in this picture this geo that's now some 1,500 meters. In this case, about 5,000 feet below sea level. But at some time in the past, the top of the geo was at sea level, and that's when it was exposed to this intense tsunami action, and its top was beveled away. So these indicate that there's been a major changes in sea level, major rise in sea level since these geos were at sea level. Okay, so over the last about 15 years, I've been working on modeling this process of addressing how the sediment was transported and deposited. And the code, I wrote this code, it's now named MABO. It's based on a code I developed at Los Alamos in the early 1990s. Solves the shallow water equations on the surface of a rotating sphere. I'll just summarize this. It uses this same grid that I use in Terra. The actual grid I'm using now has 4 times as many cells as shown here. It assumes that the dominant means of sediment transport was turbulent, rapidly flowing water, and there's good theory for describing that. And this theory of open channel flow provides a realistic means for modeling things like this raging river torrent, and a realistic means for modeling the sediment transport that occurs in this kind of environment. Now, cavitation is included in the model. It assumed as the dominant process responsible for erosion, for degradation of crystal and bedrock into fine particles. And the reality of cavitation is well known in the naval community. If you're not very careful, you can destroy your propeller if you allow it to go too fast and allow cavitation to set in. This shows a damaged ship propeller that's been attacked by cavitation, a result of small water vapor bubbles forming in low pressure areas, and those bubbles then collapse, and the collapse is so violent that it produces pressure waves that are strong enough to erode the metal, or in the case of rock, to transform a rock crystal into small sediment particles. And I also, in this model, it's matured to the point where I'm able to include continent motion in the model. And here's the model of the continent motion during the flood, and that's folded into the model. And then I use repetitive giant tsunamis generated by rapid plate tectonics to provide the forcing needed to sustain the required water velocities. And this is a little animation just giving you an idea, showing this is the water height over the continents as the tsunamis are beginning to invade the continent from the ocean. And it shows they have a tsunami generated every 1.5 minutes. So you've got many thousands of tsunamis that are unfolding here, and they rapidly erode the edges of the continent and transport those sediment particles inland and deposit them. This is the starting topography that I assume. I allow the supercontinent to be a little bit under sea level at the margins, and then it rises to a height of about 3,000 feet, 1,000 meters at the down the center of the supercontinent. I've got some snapshots, 20 days. You see these red wave-like features. Those are the tsunamis being generated in the deep ocean and slamming into the edge of the continent. This shows the cumulative bedrock erosion. The red is large, 100 meters worth, 300 feet already of rock eroded off the edge of that supercontinent. And this is the cumulative sediment deposition at 20 days. It goes up to 400 meters. That's like 1,200 feet. It's that the tsunamis are very effective in transporting that sediment onto the continent and depositing it. This is at 80 days, somewhat later. Same process is taking place. You see a block continent that has started out to the south, now about to dock with Eurasia to flesh out the Eurasian, or dock with Europe, about to flesh out the continent of Eurasia there to form Pangaea. All right, that's the cumulative erosion, the cumulative deposition. Now there's already enough sediment on the continent surface to average 580 meters over the entire continent, to give it that kind of average. This is at 120 days. Here this process is continuing. It's I have the intensity at full bore up to 150 days. This is at 120, and there's at this point there's a lot of sediment already on the continent, a lot of bedrock erosion, and this is the average amount of sediment on the continent at this point is 825 meters, and this is a snapshot near the end, and here the cataclysm is almost over the water, and you see red over the continent. That's mostly sediment that has been deposited on the continent during this cataclysm. And this is the bedrock erosion up to that point. This is the sediment distribution. And it turns out that there's a reasonable correspondence. The observed distribution today, shown on the left. The orange corresponds to what are called continental shields, which these are essentially barren of sediment. And there's a good match between where the continents have no sediment and where the is small, and then regions where there's lots of sediment, there's reasonable agreement. Some encouraging new insights from this. A source for a lot of sediment show that tsunami-driven cavitation erosion during the time span of the flood can generate new sediment at a rate sufficient to account for a sizable fraction of the entire sediment inventory. And the second encouraging thing is how the sediment was placed on the continents. An explanation. The water speeds from the tsunamis were sufficient to sustain the level of turbulence needed to suspend this large volume of sediment, to transport it to distant locations, and to deposit that sediment on the continent surface over vast areas of the continent interior. And then the large horizontal dimensions of the deposited sediment. The tsunami-driven flow accounts for the coherent patterns with large horizontal dimensions. Then finally, there's this striking correlation with today's sediment distribution. Striking may be a little strong, but there's definitely a correlation. An extremely encouraging feature from this calculation is the amazing correlation of the global sediment pattern both the regions of thick sediment accumulation and regions of minimal accumulation, corresponding to the shield areas. So if a person is interested, the details of that calculation I just showed are in this paper I presented, I and a colleague, Evan Navarro. The title was The Role of Large Tsunamis in the Formation of the Flood Sediment Record. And it can be obtained online under the Proceedings of the International Conference on Creationism, the Volume 9, which is for the 2023 conference. Okay, so just to wind up here, I want to point out that Jesus very clearly affirmed the reality of the flood. We have these verses from Matthew 24. For the coming of the Son of Man will be just like the days of Noah. For as in those days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark, and they did not understand until the flood came and took them all away. So will the coming of the Son of Man be. So Jesus is very, very clearly identifying, putting his stamp of authority on the account given in Genesis of the flood. And he likens his coming to the way it was in the days of Noah. So, and then in Luke, a companion passage, and just as it happened in the days of Noah, so it will also be in the days of the Son of Man. They were eating, they were drinking, they were marrying, they were being given in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark and the flood came and destroyed them all. So Jesus is sounding an alarm, saying that that things are going to be similar to the way they were in the days of Noah, where there was rampant sin, rampant evil across the face of the earth. And so I say that we're seeing, it appears to me, signs that are similar. So we need to take that warning seriously, especially in light of just how that the first cataclysm was global in scale and destroyed the world, destroyed the earth. So I'll leave it at that. I encourage all of us to add a strong defense of the flood to our apologetics toolkit, to be able to defend the flood, the reality of the flood, and not hold back, that this was a genuine event that is part of the actual history of the world. So thank you very much.
Awesome. That was an awesome presentation. Thank you, and we do appreciate it. I do have some questions, of course, including some questions developed from seeing your presentation. You answered a lot of the questions I had prepared already, so I kind of figured you would. But I got some new ones now. But before we get into that, could you give me who was the first to suggest plate tectonics? I think it was a creationist, wasn't it, originally?
There was a French guy, Antonio Snyder, who I believe it was the same year that Darwin published his book Origin of Species, 1859. He published maps where he was arguing that North and South America had split away in the past from Africa and Europe, and that he believed that occurred during the flood. So that would have been basically an argument for certainly catastrophic plate motion or continent motion during the flood.
Some creationists might have a problem with the supercontinent, but if I understand it correctly, most biblical creationists accept the fact that the continents were once all together like that and broke apart during the flood. Is that right?
That's right. And you have the passage in Genesis in chapter 1 where on day 3 God said, "Let the waters below the firmament be gathered together into one place and let the dry land appear. So if the oceans were together in one place, it's it's not implausible that the land also was in one place.
Yes, absolutely. Um, and uh, on that catastrophic plate tectonics, that green graph that you showed with the arrows, you say that there's like sinking of the mantle. Is that correct?
There were seeking that what was sinking into the mantle were these plates that were at the surface. They're about 50 miles thick. You've got a slab of rock about 50 miles thick, and these were peeling off and sinking into the earth. And they're able to get to the bottom of the mantle according to the calculation, according to the uh, the measured deformation properties of the rock. Shows that that runaway can happen, can get the rock to the bottom of the mantle in just um, a few weeks' time, a few
Some
months'
have
time.
some have described it as kind of like a conveyor belt, kind of moving. Is that how you would describe it? Like a conveyor belt? Kind of reminds me like green graph with the
Yes,
arrows.
yes, right, yes.
Uh, okay. I actually have a quote here from Dr. Andrew Snelling. He mentions this originally in the Answers magazine, but it's located on Answers in Genesis website. It says, in this model, talking about catastrophic plate tectonics, as the ocean floor in the area of ocean trenches sinks into the mantle, it drags the rest of the ocean floor with it. In a conveyor belt-like fashion, the sinking slabs of cold ocean floor produce stress in the surrounding hot mantle rock. These stresses in turn cause the rock to become hotter and more deformable, allowing ocean slabs to sink even further. The ultimate result in a runaway process that causes the entire pre-flood ocean floor to sink to the bottom of the mantle in a matter of a few weeks. As the slabs sink at rates of feet per second, down to the mantle slash core boundary, enormous amounts of energy are released. Would you say that that would describe your CPT pretty well?
Yes, pretty well.
Awesome. I actually had Andrew Snelling not too long ago on my channel to talk about radiometric dating. He's a very good guy. I liked our conversation with on radiometric dating, and you and him also were both part of the rate project as well. Um,
That's right.
yeah, I actually got the books here that y'all had that on the rate project, um, but anyway, on the catastrophic plate tectonics, what exactly would you say triggered this? Would you said something about stress, and I've heard that people suggest the heat as well. What would your assessment be on that?
Okay. Uh, Over the years, I've resisted giving an answer because I didn't feel like I had a confident answer to that question. But just over the last, I'd say over the last year, I feel like I've got an answer I'm pretty comfortable with, and it does require some background to understand it, I think. Um, but uh, it turns out that this sediment record I was mentioning uh, frequently during this talk, you know, this record you see uh, exposed in the Grand Canyon. There are some aspects of that that have been enigmas to the geology community for um, 60 years or more. Features that have been referred to as mega sequences. In other words, all that sediment is uh, in a set of six big packages of sediment, and each package has been referred to as a mega sequence. But a remarkable aspect of that pattern is that there are erosional discontinuities between each package, between one package and the next one. And if you start looking at that record in terms of these big packages, in terms of these mega sequences, there is one of those discontinuities is the great unconformity at the bottom of the first package. In other words, the great unconformity indeed is a big erosional boundary. So it appears that what started the flood was a lot of erosion. So what I've realized is that well, first of all, there's got to be a lot of cooling of this newly forming ocean floor that I was describing. And so it appears very, I'm pretty confident that the cooling of that ocean floor didn't take place smoothly during the flood, but occurred in jerks, and it occurred in episodes, in abrupt episodes, and with each episode, the sea bottom dropped by about on the order of 1,500 feet or so, and that dropped the sea level by, say, 1,000 feet, and that sudden drop in sea level resulted in water rapidly rushing off the continents and eroding, especially the sediment that was at the centers of these continents, and produced these erosional unconformities between the mega sequences. All right, so I've been talking about that. I emphasized that at this last International Conference on Creationism. I gave a talk at the last Creation Research Society conference last summer about it, and I'm planning to do it again this summer. So, but what I want to answer your question, emphasize all this erosion at the very beginning of the flood. And so I'm suggesting that was a result of extraordinary cooling of the ocean floor at the very beginning of the flood, and that would have increased the density of the ocean plates and caused them to become unstable and run away. So rather than heat being responsible, I'm now fairly confident that it was an episode of cooling of the ocean floor that triggered the cataclysm. So I'm sure you've never heard that before. It's only been about a year and a half that I've publicly talked about that, but now that is my preferred answer to that question.
Right. I'm used to hearing that people say that usually heat is involved in it. I've heard would you say that there could be contribution with the fountains of the great deep? Because we know the Bible does talk about the fountains of the great deep spraying out. And so when you mention the stress upon the mantle, would that cause a tremendous amount of stress upon the mantle?
In my talk I just gave, I presented my own explanation of the fountains of the great deep. That these were fountains generated, or what occurred during the flood were these water fountains, steam jets coming up from the bottom of the ocean floor as a result of hot magma in direct contact with seawater, where these plates were pulling apart. Now, so you ask, it appears that the fountains of the great deep existed before the flood. So what were they? Well, my answer would be they're like the black smokers that we have today on the Earth. Along the mid-ocean ridge system, you've got hot rock beneath. That hot water comes up in jets, and because there's lots of sulfides in around that you have these black sulfide particles in that hot water, and they're commonly called black smokers because of so much black sulfide in the mostly iron sulfide in the water. But so I'm associating the fountains of the Great Deep with pre-flood um, fountains. They're relatively tame, but then when the where it says in the fountains of the Great Deep were cleaved apart, that's a valid Hebrew translation of that word. Cleaved, broken up, or cleaved apart. Uh, then you had explosive steam jets happen, and those were spectacular fountains. So that you had these supersonic fountains that went up into the stratosphere that followed some rather tame fountains that were on the sea bottom before the flood. So that again is a little complicated answer that the average person might have trouble following. But if you're asking me what my answer is, it'd be along that line.
So let me make sure I understand you. You don't see the CPT as a result of the fountains in the Great Deep. Rather, you see the fountains of the Great Deep as a result of the what's going on with the CPT. Is that right? With the movement of the plate tectonics or plates.
Yeah, I would say yes. That would be the way I would phrase it. What produced them was the cleaving apart when it talks about the breaking up or cleaving apart of the fountains of the great deep. Uh, that produced these supersonic jets, and so they were essentially at the same place that the pre-flood fountains were, and the same place where the fountains are today, the black smokers, but what caused them to uh, basically explode with these violent geysers, violent steam jets.
Do you still hold to accelerated nuclear decay? That was the position of the right team.
Yes, I do. It seems to be the only way to account for the observations that we obtained in with the rate project. The only way to account for the helium, retained helium in the zircons, the only way to account for the polonium radio halos, and uh, and also consistent with the C14 we found in diamonds.
Awesome. Um, and do you see this heat as it being any kind of contribution or exactly? I mean, there are people that say that heat was generated during the global flood. And you're saying that the bottom of the ocean floor was cooler, is that right?
Well, I do believe the oceans, you had so much magma uh, at the bottom of the ocean as CPT was occurring, that you were putting a lot of heat into the oceans from that contact with magma at the bottom of the ocean. So I'm saying the oceans were heated, and that those hot oceans were the cause of the ice age after the flood. So I'm not diminishing that what's been claimed about that. I
Okay.
believe, but the amount of heat was not sufficient to boil the oceans away. The oceans still, were liquid water, but they
Right.
got pretty warm. There's evidence that the oceans right after the flood were roughly um, the temperature of we're on the order of 30 degrees centigrade, which is corresponds to about, well, the temperature of surface water at the equator on Earth today.
This
But
will
they were
actually aid.
top to bottom, not just at the surface.
This will actually aid in
So
rapid evaporation too, because in the ice age you would have to have lots of snow and ice, and so you can't get that just by cooling the world down.
that's right. That's
So
right.
but the flow would give us that. I actually am planning on having Dr. Mike or Michael Ord on here in a couple weeks. That'll be interesting because we'll be talking about stuff like that. So, yeah. So you would hold accelerate nuclear decay. Okay, this brings up another topic that gets brought up. This is a heavy topic right now on the internet. Something I've been thinking about a lot as well. It's called the heat problem. And so, I know you've heard of it. They say that you're the first one who actually proposed it, actually, in your paper when you talked about the I guess the friction of the tectonic plates as they're moving. And of course, nowadays, critics, when they use the word heat problem, they really mean like a series of objections that they have. They even throw in the meteorite that they think killed the dinosaurs, and then that's not even our position. So, but they also throw in accelerate nuclear decay and things like that. So, I know that in previous interviews, I've heard you say that you thought it could be miraculous. But I don't know if maybe you had some more time to think about that and have an idea. I have some ideas of what I think, but I just want to hear what you have to say on it.
Yes, I alluded to the problem of the cooling of the ocean floor. Uh, and the problem is that rock, silicate rock, as far as its uh, ability to conduct heat, is considered an insulator. It conducts heat very poorly. So if you have this layer of rock at a mid-ocean ridge, and most of the, the the top, say, 50 miles of that rock, it's not that far from its melting temperature in today in the Earth, and also during the flood, during catastrophic plate tectonics. So you're starting with rock at a mid-ocean ridge, not far from its melting point, and then to get to today's world, you've got to cool that rock by something like 700 or 800 degrees centigrade throughout its depth of, say, 50 miles to get it to its present state. And there is a fairly simple equation that you can apply to estimate how long it takes to do that. And let's just say, uh, I remember I did this recently to cool a slab of rock that's 80 kilometers thick, that would be about 50 miles thick, uh, using the well verified experimental value for the conductivity of rock. It takes 63 million years. So there's no way that I know of, no physical law, no physical means that I know of, that one can remove that heat fast enough to um, you know to get around that. The only way that I know of, and I've mentioned this in my very first paper on catastrophic plate tectonics back in 1986. So that's been what? That's been uh, almost, let's see, what, um, well, it's almost 40 years ago. And that the only solution that I know of is God's intervention. Supernatural, it requires a supernatural solution. Um, So basically, that is the so-called heat problem, cooling the ocean lithosphere after the flood. It's my contention that every flood model has this problem. It's you know it's if unless you're going to argue that the present ocean floor is pre-flood. If you're going to if you allow for the ocean floor to have formed during the flood, then you've got this huge problem of how do you cool it in the last whatever few thousand years. There's no way you can cool it, no physical mechanism that I know of or anybody knows of that can do that. So I say, 2 Peter 3, 3 through 6, Peter uses the flood as an example to how to counter uniformitarianism. In other words, he's implying that God acted supernaturally during the flood. So I don't apologize for saying God acted supernaturally during the flood. 2 Peter 3 affirms it, teaches it. So I don't apologize. And somebody that wants to get contentious, I say, you not, you know, don't you take that passage seriously. Do not take that passage seriously, but that God had to have acted supernaturally for Peter to use the flood as a counterexample to uniformitarianism. So anyway, I don't. I believe it has to be supernatural, and that the Bible affirms that it was supernatural, or something about the flood was supernatural, and this is, one of the more prominent things that needs to be.
Are you
So, are
open
you
to?
tracking with me on that?
Yeah. That's good. I know that there are people that have come up with naturalistic explanation. I know Dr. Russell Humphreys has a few, doesn't he? Um, uh, I think he suggested possibility of relativity and that sort of thing. But uh, yeah, it's. Are you open? I did want to ask you this. Are you open to a naturalistic explanation if God could have acted through a naturalistic process? I mean, are you open to that, or have you already decided what you think and
No,
stand on
I
that?
have
Or
to say I'm open to it, but I think I know enough physics to have already evaluated all the possibilities. I'm not dogmatic on that, but I'd say if somebody has a suggestion, let me hear it. I'm absolutely not aware, as far as all the physics I know about, of any way that could happen naturalistically.
hello. I am going to add some uh, notes here in the middle of my editing. Um, First off, I want to point out that I have no problem at all with the idea that something could be a miracle, or even the idea of someone invoking a miracle. Some people have a problem with that. They don't like it. A lot of critics don't like it for obvious reason. They don't really like miracles to begin with. They don't like getting involved with that. They think that it cannot be researched or investigated or something of that nature. Sometimes they'll say, well, the person is not really invoking science if they invoke a miracle. But that's just not true. A person can still be engaging in science. All of science, as far as I'm concerned, is based on a miracle. Because creation itself is a miracle. Even if you believe in the Big Bang, you're looking at something miraculous because you're believing something came from nothing eventually. But even if you just think it's going to happen over billions of years and that sort of thing. But either way, I think all of science is based on creation, and so and if creation is a miracle, then it makes sense that all of science is based on a miracle too, because science works off the principle of uniformity in nature, works off the idea of the uniformity of nature, the idea that nature is uniform in the fact that it has predictable patterns that can be discovered by us in nature, and that it has a type of order to it. So, in other words, I'd never have to worry about the law of gravity being different tomorrow as it is today, or the laws of motion being different in 10 years from now, Or if I study event that happened in the past, I don't have to worry about the gravity not working the same way or the laws of thermodynamics being different then as it is now. Or 20 years from now, the way it all that the laws of physics have always been, it's the way it always will be. I know that there's certain patterns in nature, there's a certain order and structure to it, and all of this is justified within the Christian biblical worldview. Whereas in a naturalistic worldviews, like naturalism, for example, uh, you can't justify. It wouldn't make sense in your worldview why we should find predictable patterns in nature and a type of order and structure to the universe. We would expect something that allegedly happened randomly and by chance to be chaotic, not ordered, not structured like this, not filled with patterns that we can discover. And on top of that, we trust our very thoughts when it comes to those patterns, when it comes to interpreting the data. And if we're nothing more than just flesh and chemicals and electrical synapses and going off inside our brain, how could we even trust our thoughts? But we trust our thoughts all the time when it comes to interpreting data. And so I think that science is based on a miracle. So I have no problem with somebody invoking a miracle or even invoking a miracle at the same time while talking about science. I think you can do science and that both. And we also must be careful as Christians to not engage in metaphysical naturalism. Now, it might be consistent for a naturalist to engage in metaphysical naturalism, but for a Christian to engage in metaphysical naturalism, it's inconsistent. We must be careful to not do that. What is metaphysical naturalism? Metaphysical naturalism is where you assume that it's like you act like God doesn't exist and that God did not act in history. Even if you really believe that God exists, even if you really believe that God acted in history, and and you believe in the incarnation, you believe in the inspired, inerrant Word of God, and that sort of thing, but yet you pretend like none of those things are the case. You pretend like doesn't exist. So when you interpret the data, when you look at the evidence, you just act like God didn't do anything. That God is not involved at all in the equation. And I don't think that would be consistent for a Christian to be able to do. Um, that does not mean that you have to think everything that happens is a miracle. Some things are miracles, some things are not. But the point is that you don't treat it like if the evidence supports a miracle in metaphysical naturalism, you go literally even if every bit of the evidence supports that of a miraculous explanation, you still try to figure out a naturalist explanation because you have to act as though God cannot super intervene like that. In the natural world, in a miraculous sort of way, in a supernatural sort of way, and you gotta treat it like God's not part of the equation. So you could have tons of evidence that supports that a miraculous explanation has occurred, but yet you ignore that in favor of a naturalistic explanation. You assume a naturalistic explanation, even though all the evidence is pointing to a miraculous one. So we have to be careful not to engage in metaphysical naturalism, but we also must not be. We must also be careful in engaging in what I like to call metaphysical supernaturalism. This is where you assume everything is a miracle. Every time you encounter an issue that you can't quite explain, you automatically drum it up as a miracle. And we got to be careful of that because we cannot use the word miracle as a cop out. Miracles happen, but they are not everyday occurrences. They're not like God is doing a miracle every 2 seconds or something. If that was the case, they would lose their wow factor. So, what I call their wow factor. Miracles are designed to send a message, to reveal something, to show the truth of something, like the truth of who Jesus is, for example. Jesus said that his miracles verify who he said he was. And so that's what the point of view of miracles is. Miracles would lose all power in their message if they were everyday occurrences. So we can't just assume that miracles are always happening or try to use miracles as a cop out anytime we don't have an explanation for something. So we have to be careful in not engaging in metaphysical naturalism, but not engaging in metaphysical supernaturalism either. And just kind of find our way in the middle where we go where the evidence goes. If the evidence points to a miraculous explanation, then so be it. If the evidence points to a supernatural explanation, so be it. Or a naturalistic explanation, so be it. And that's fine either way. And it all depends. So for me, the issue is not whether God could do a miracle, can do a miracle, but the issue is whether God did do a miracle. And so, and usually, when we justify a miracle, we usually do it biblically. Now, I think Dr. Baumgardner attempted something like that by referencing Peter. I think it's in First Peter. I know it's in chapter 3, so it's either chapter 3 of First Peter or chapter 3 of Second Peter, but I think it's First Peter. In which case, Peter references the flood event, and he talks about the idea of uniformitarianism, what became known as uniformitarianism. I don't think it was called that then, but what we now call uniformitarianism. And the idea is that things occurred as they have in the past, the same as they do today. And Peter's like, no, wait a minute, there was a global flood. And Baumgartner says, well, he implies that God had, he says, supernaturally acted in that. Now, I agree that the global flood itself was a supernatural event. Absolutely. I think that he is right on that. But that does not mean everything that occurred in the flood is a supernatural event. That's actually a fallacy. No offense to Dr. Baumgardner, but that's actually a fallacy in logic called the fallacy of division. It's where you assume that if it's true of the parts, it's true of the whole, it's true of the parts. The fallacy of division is the inverse of fallacy of composition. Fallacy of composition says if it's true of the parts, it's true of the whole. And so fallacy of division says if it's true of the whole, it's true of the parts. It doesn't follow, right? Because parts could actually not be comprised of the same thing as all the rest of it is. And so you can't sit there and assume that just because it's true of the whole, it's true of every part in the whole. And so it's true that the global flood is a supernatural event, and that Peter is likely implying that, possibly. It is not true, however, that means everything that happened during the flood is a supernatural event. So you got to keep that in mind, because that is a fallacy in logic. So no offense to Dr. Baumgardner, but it doesn't follow logically. But with that said, do we have a biblical reason? I don't think the Bible really addresses either accelerated nuclear decay or the CPT directly. Other than we know that the continents were once together, and obviously now they're not. And so I don't think it directly references that in terms of the heat. So so this is kind of like an open question biblically. Whether God got rid of it supernaturally or God got rid of it naturalistically, that's an open question because the Bible doesn't really tell us either way. Okay, so biblically, we're open to taking either position we want to take, depending on what we think the evidence supports to, or whether there's a naturalistic explanation for it, or whatnot. I have actually been working on something. A naturalistic explanation to it. Now, here's my before I give you some of my thoughts on that. Here's my my take on this. Like I said, I have no problem with someone invoking a miracle or being a miracle, but I have to have a biblical reason to think it's a miracle. I want to be able to kind of take kind of a middle ground and look at the evidence and arguments and see, well, based on the evidence of what the Bible tells us actually happened during the flood, can we come up with an explanation that is within the bounds of the laws of physics to get rid of that much heat? Now, Baumgardner says he's a geophysicist, so he knows a lot about physics, and he says there's no physics reason to get rid of it. Now, what he's talking about is because of the short time span that's involved. Well, the the amount of time he's talking about is less than 5 months. 150 days is when the fountains of the Great Deep closed their things, and he mentioned something during the presentation about 120, 125 days, something like that. So we're talking about less than 5 months because 150 days is 5 months, or a little less than 5 months actually. So it's about 4 months and something. So we're talking about a really, really short amount of time. In addition to that, we're also talking about getting rid of a lot of heat because the plates are moving about 1 billion times faster than normal rates. And so he's talking about getting rid of a lot of heat as a result. And on top of that, you're talking about getting rid of it very, very fast because the melting point of rock is really, really low. So the rock cannot possibly get that hot without melting. And we know that didn't happen. So that's why he's suggesting a possible a miracle solution to it. Now, here's the thing. What if you could actually manage the heat and not get the floorboard, the floor that hot? And I've been testing with something that I've been working on for a while. I'm not ready yet to go fully public with it, but it involves feedback loops and it involves expelling that heat through volcanic eruptions. It involves, I have a feedback loop, a theory with accelerate nuclear decay as well, that I'm writing a paper on, and I'm going to be writing a paper on my solution to the so-called heat problem as well. And it works off the high specific heat capacity of water and to absorb that heat as well. It's got a tremendous amount of ability to be able to absorb a lot of energy as well. And my model actually manages heat over time. So it regulates it and allows it. It doesn't have to be that short of a time span, 5 months or even a year. You can actually stretch it out a little longer. But that's more about that later on down the road. But it is actually possible. Now the within the bounds of the assumptions that Baumgardner was operating with, yeah, he's right. You wouldn't be able to make the heat go away in that span of time, that quickly. Given how much heat is involved and that sort of thing. So I'm not saying Baumgartner is wrong there. He is absolutely right. That's the reason why the particular model that I have stretches it out, stretches the heat out, and actually does it in such a way that it gets rid of the heat without having to heat up the ocean floor like that. And so you can still work off a cooler ocean floor. In fact, my model actually works better um, uh, when compared to the new trigger that Dr. Baumgartner mentions in the interview. So not only does it work really well with heat, as the trigger, but it also really works really well with a cooler ocean bottom. So I like the discussion that we had with Dr. Baumgartner. I did send him an email afterwards, ask him if he would evaluate my idea and tell me what he thinks of it. He hasn't got back with me on it as of right now. I'm hoping eventually he does. Maybe he will. I don't know. I'm hoping he will. I respect Dr. Baumgardner. I think he's an excellent scientist. I think he's an excellent Christian above and above all, he's an excellent Christian. Before we even started our interview, before I even hit the record button, we were already in prayer beforehand. And so I think that he's a great man of God. I think he's a great scientist. And I respect him a lot. That doesn't mean we can't have some differences. That's fine. But I greatly respect Dr. Baumgardner. I hope I have him on there again. But I do have some ideas, and I wanted to clarify some stuff on that because not because I'm going against Baumgardner or anything like that. That wasn't the point of it. The point of it is that I know how critics are in general, but also on my channel specifically. But I also know how critics are in general. And what they will do is that they will take Dr. Baumgardner's words out of context, or they'll use them against me, or they'll treat it like, well, he's an expert in your channel, and even he agrees that this is not possible, and said yes, and understand within the balance of he's talking about. He's talking about within less than 5 months, or more than likely less than 4 months. He's talking about a lot of heat, and he's talking about cooler ocean bottoms not getting heated up and that sort of thing. And that's what he's talking about when he says that is not going to fit well with the laws of physics. That's what he means. But what if there's a way to manage it, regulate it, stretch it out, and do it in such a way? Because I actually set it up on a feedback loop. It's actually pretty a clever idea. What if there was such a way? In addition to that, Baumgardner also said that he's not dogmatic on it. That's what he said, and that he is open to it. So you got open to the possibility of a naturalistic explanation. So with that in mind, you got to keep in mind that that there is a very specific context involved with Dr. Baumgardner's words, and a lot of critics though is willing to give us up to a year even then. So even many critics don't try to argue that we have to do it that rapidly, but that we have up to a year to try to get rid of the heat. Or at least they'll say that, but then they'll act like we have to get rid of the heat in 2 seconds. But that's just not the way it is. But that's actually an assumption that we're bringing to the table here. But what if you could manage that heat? What if you could regulate that heat over time and allow that heat to be able to be dealt with in a more timely fashion that would be fitting for the laws of physics? And my model actually came up with a way of making that happen. So I'm really happy for my model. I can't wait till I make it fully public. I'm currently in the process of getting a paper peer review. I'm going to get that finished up. I have to get the copyright forms printed out and scanned and put on my computer, and then I gotta send everything in, um, and they'll look at it, and if it passes the test editorially, then it will go to out in the peer. They'll find the first they have to find the specific scientists to actually peer review it, and then they'll send it out to them, and then they have a certain amount of time to peer review it. They usually try to make it where they have, I think, up to 6 months before it becomes published. So we'll see how all that pays off. But I hope to talk more about this model. I hope to discuss more about the so-called heat problem. I've been spending months and months and months on this subject matter. And so although I know Baumgardner has been giving the explanation for the miraculous for a while now. I know he's previously said it in the interviews. And despite the fact that he has promoted that idea a lot of other scientists that are also looking into it, like Dr. Russell Humphreys, often engages into the naturalist explanations, like Humphreys had suggested at one point relativity, where the universe where the universe expands outward, if God expanded it a lot faster, then during the flood year, then it could actually make the heat go away. I think he has a revised version of that. I'm not exactly sure what his new approach is now. I know that's the approach he took during the rate project. So I'm not exactly sure what his new view is on it, but I think he has another way of looking at it. So, but I think he still uses relativity. But in any given case, that's just a few thoughts that I had on it. Again, loved my interview with Dr. Baumgardner. Wouldn't change a thing. I'm glad we had that interview. I can't wait to interview him again. I wouldn't mind doing one on C14 and diamonds. And I imagine Dr. Baumgardner's used to people differing with him on the explanation of the so-called heat problem. I'm sure he's used to people differing with him on that. He sounded like he was used to people being contentious about it. I'm not contentious with him about it. He can believe, like I said, I have no problem with someone invoking a miracle. Some people have an issue with that, but I don't have a problem with that. My issue is whether God did act miraculously or not. And I don't think in this situation he really needed to. Um, and and I do, but my main issue why I am talking about this right now, and at least giving you a taste of what is to come on the way I've modeled everything. It's the fact that that I know how critics are and how they were going to pounce on my channel, and how they're going to just jump all over on Baumgardner's words and use them against me in debates, and so I add this explanatory comment in there so that I can kind of give you an understanding of the context of what Dr. John Baumgardner is saying. And I don't necessarily differ with him on in terms of the laws of physics and trying to get rid of all that heat in 5 months and things like that. I don't disagree with him on that. I think he is right on that. That's why I don't try to get rid of the heat in 5 months or a year. I think most of the heat would because of the model that I proposed, would have gotten rid of in a year. But some of it will stretch out beyond a year. I don't know why we assume that all that heat has to be gone before the start of next year. The Earth is able to handle trillions of joules of heat a year. It's got. I looked it up the other day. It was like a little over 3 terajoules. Each terajoule is like a trillion joules. So that's a lot of heat per year. By the way, that's per year, including 1.34, I think, from geothermal sources and 1.6474, something like that, from solar radiation. So sun gives us most of our heat, actually, above 50% of it at least. The heat is coming from the sun, and and despite all that, and about a little over 3 terajoules a year. And of course, the heat doesn't just kind of go away after, within 1 year. We got lots of heat that probably overlaps with other years as well. We could be experiencing heat that's, been around for years now. So it's not necessary to just make all the heat go away in 1 year. I don't know why we think we have to kind of get rid of all the heat. But as long as the more intense severity of the heat is gotten rid of in the first year, then the rest of it can be stretched out through natural processes, actually, that normally deals with heat. But anyway, that's just some comments on my part. I just wanted to add that in because we were talking about the heat problem. I know how critics are, and they were going to pounce on Baumgardner's words. So I wanted to add that explanatory comment in there because as time goes on, I'm going to be delving deeper and deeper into the so-called heat issue, the heat problem, and be able to engage with it more and more and more and more. But I'm also going to be publicizing my model as well. I plan on doing an entire video possibly series. I don't know which I'm going to do, and probably a video. I just might make just a single video, but it's going to be a big video. It's going to be a very significant video, and it's going to be one where I publicize not only my theory of accelerated nuclear decay, but also publicize my model for resolving the so-called heat problem. That includes the heat problem with the CPT, that includes the heat problem involving accelerated nuclear decay, and any other heat problem that you could think of will be resolved in this model. So I can't wait for those kinds of results, but let's continue with the interview. It's about over. All right. I just wanted to
So
get your take on that. Thank you for your thoughts on that. I appreciate it very much. Um, uh, just a couple more questions. That they have a actual rock from the mantle. Is that, am I understanding that correctly?
not many, but we do have a few fragments from the mantle. Uh,
I've always wondered how, because I always wonder what evidence they have of the Earth being split up that way, and I was like, oh, that'd be cool to find out. So they actually have rock from the mantle.
well,
That's pretty cool.
there are features known as kimberlite or kimberlite pipes. That's where uh, a good fraction of the Earth's diamonds are found inside these pipes that represent explosions, the material that's been expelled from the interior of the Earth at supersonic velocities, it seems, and sprayed out diamonds all over the surrounding uh, region. And so it's these, and included in some of those samples of kimberlites are samples of mantle rock.
Awesome. Do you you've heard of the hydroplate theory? I mean, I know that you have to go soon, so you probably, I mean, that would take an entire video just to really get into it. But what is your thoughts on the hydroplate theory? Is it something, because I know that's another popular viewpoint, and are you like, say I have a response to the hydroplate model,
No,
that sort of thing?
I'm sadly, I believe that Walt Brown was a deceiver, and he's deceived a lot of people. And it's when you're dealing with some of these technical issues, it's not that hard to deceive people who don't have much technical background. So Walt Brown was good at spinning stories, telling fairy tales, and backing it up with references to the scientific literature. So I say it's all a house of cards. It's a sadly it's a deception. There's the idea that all the comets and asteroids were spewed out into space during the flood. It's utter nonsense. It simply cannot be defended. There's no physics that could could support that.
Did he
And
argue
so,
for, I was gonna say, did he argue for a water reservoir underneath or something like that? Underneath the
well, he
water,
is, yeah, he assumes it. He doesn't have any evidence for it, but he assumes it. And he says in the original book he wrote, he said, I invite you to accept this by faith, and if you do, here are all the results. But he never gives any evidence and to support that. It's just a starting hypothesis that he uh, uh, invites his audience to buy into.
I've heard something about magnetic reversals during the flood. Would that be something that's connected to catastrophic plate tectonics or not?
Well, yeah, we have we there's plenty of evidence in the rocks that the Earth's magnetic field reversed on the order of 100 times during the flood. And so yes, the magnetic reversals are a reality. Dr. Humphreys has written about this, and I'm actually looking for a student who's has the ability to do numerical modeling of that process.
You mentioned geological evidence for catastrophic plate tectonics. That's something that a lot of people don't think that exists. But could you kind of like really briefly, kind of just point by point, spell out the evidence for catastrophic plate tectonics in case someone just wants to know, okay, what is the response to the allegation that there's no evidence for catastrophic plate tectonics? Just kind of give the bullet points.
Well, I would say uh, to start with that there's all the evidence the secular world has for uh, plate motions in the past. You can bring that to bear with the requirement that all that history has to have unfolded since the beginning of the flood. That the fossil record, uh, is the only way fossils can have occurred during the history given in the Bible is during the flood. And so you've got to have all of that history, something like between 500 and 600 million years of Earth history that has to have occurred during the flood. And that physical history includes the opening of the Atlantic Ocean, for example. And if it happened during the flood, it has to have been fast, and that's equivalent to catastrophic plate tectonics. So I think that's all the argument that's needed, in my opinion, for catastrophic plate tectonics.
You mentioned
It's
gales
you know
for tsunamis too during the flood, and that would have been something that would be connected to the situation involving with CPT, right?
yeah, it's but as far as just if you're talking about it, how do you defend catastrophic plate tectonics? It's the time frame of Genesis 6 through 8, or let's just say the time frame of Genesis 1 to 11 just a few thousand years of Earth history, combined with the evidence that the uh, uh, plates have moved thousands of miles. And so so if you're going to move the plates by thousands of miles in just a short period of time, especially during the flood, if you're going to look at how much plate motion occurred during the flood, uh, and you have the time scale of the flood of about a year, that's all the data you need to affirm or prove even to affirm catastrophic plate tectonics.
Right. And one final question, Dr. Baumgardner. What if speaking to the audience, what was would you say your final thoughts when it comes to CPT, the global flood? What do you want to leave everyone with? What is your final thoughts, your final conclusion on your research concerning CPT, the global flood, and how this relates to everyone else?
Uh, well, I guess I would say there's abundant evidence that the flood really happened. Uh, in the fossils, in the sediment layers themselves, and the we have uh, the evidence from the seafloor that continents moved vast distances during the time of the flood. So it was a catastrophe, uh, just a almost beyond human comprehension. And so I believe it's important for Christians not to have any doubts about the reality of the flood. It should be an established reality that's not even subject to question. And uh, there is that warning at the end that the days just before Jesus returns are going to be similar to the days as it was in the days of Noah. So it's imperative that we be about uh, uh, kingdom business. We need to be proclaiming the gospel in a serious way because it may not be very long before Jesus comes back. There's so many signs that his return is soon. So uh, so I would tie in a defense of the flood to a defense of the urgency to be serious as believers in the days in which we're living.
Awesome. I
I,
appreciate you. I appreciate your time today. Thank you again for joining us on here. This is your first time on Apologetics 101. I hope it's been a great experience. I really appreciate it very, very much. And I appreciate your time for giving us. And you did great. And I love having you on here. Uh, this has been great for me. When I first heard your name, I heard you were like one of the world's foremost experts on plate tectonics. Is that correct?
um, I'm not sure I would agree with that. I mean, there are uh, it's a there's it's a big field. And so there's lots of details that people are that focus on specialized topics are way more knowledgeable of than I am. But I was I you know I was trained. I got my PhD at a time where the field was very active, and I was in those circles, and I was you know. Uh, I was pleased that I was somewhat on the cutting edge of numerical modeling of plate tectonics. So that, yeah, back in the 80s and 90s, uh, I was in those circles. Yes,
You're certainly one of the experts on the young Earth creationist side on plate tectonics for sure in the modern day. And I saw where you got an interview with Donnie Badinsky from Standing for Truth Ministries. You're going to be having that soon on evidence for the Genesis flood. Is that right? On
that's
Standing for
right.
Truth. Okay, cool. I'm a moderator on there, so you'll see me in the chat. I appreciate you coming on here, and I guess unless you have anything final to say, then we go ahead in the interview.
Okay. I'll just mention that I already sort of put the talk together for him, and that I just used that talk for you today. So I, I,
Awesome.
I'm thinking that it might not be much different. I might tweak it a little bit, but probably not much different for him.
Right. His question would probably be more air to directing it to the evidence of the global flood. I think the evidence of the global flood is awesome, and I'm gonna probably get into that quite a bit when I discuss how the flood shaped our world with Michael Ord. So that's a very interesting topic matter. I enjoyed your presentation. I think that it was very comprehensive. I almost started questioning whether I should even have any Q&A. It was so comprehensive. But thank you for your time. I do appreciate it, and we all do. And thank you for what you do. I really appreciate it, and so happy to have someone here on from Liberty University because that is my college. That's the one that I'm planning on getting my second degree from, and master's too, hopefully eventually.
Okay, well, Lord bless you and enjoyed the interaction, and hope you continue to uh, have a fruitful ministry, fruitful labor for the Lord Jesus.
Thank you. I appreciate it. God bless.
Okay.
Well, that's it for today in Apologetics 101. Again, I apologize for waiting so long in the year, at the start of the year, to have a video. I've been really focused on the so-called heat problem that I've been really, really, really focused on lately, and I'm still focused on. Uh, so I figured it would be a good idea to have one. I've been wanting to have one for a while on catastrophic plate tectonics, and now I did, and it was a really good video. I really appreciate Dr. John Baumgardner. I know that me and Baumgardner might have a couple points here and there that we might differ with, but the vast majority of what he said in this video I agree with. I'm glad that I had him on here. I highly respect Dr. Baumgardner. He is an excellent addition to the scientists that we have on our side that favors biblical creationism. So I really appreciate him coming on here, and I hope you too also appreciate him coming on here, and drop me a comments below. Let me know what you think. Don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel. I will appreciate it. And we'll see you next time on Apologetics 101. This is Brian signing off.